This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.
Hi, this is John Holl, and welcome to the show. We are in New York's Hudson Valley today, and this is an area of the country that's become a hotbed for brewing and beer innovation. And perhaps there's no place that was as anticipated as where we are today, which is Industrial Arts Brewing Company. Jeff O'Neill, affectionately known as Chief, is the brewer and owner here. This is his first brewery after a career spent brewing on both coasts. He worked for others, and notably Ithaca Beer Company and the Peacekill Brewing Company. You can find his beers on draft and in cans around the area. They are clean, they are inventive, and they are in demand. And if you find yourself in the area, don't pass them by. Chief, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. That's a really swell intro.
Well, you know, it's swell beer, and it's worth it.
Thank you, man.
You know, this is
we're working really hard to deliver on those promises that you just made on my behalf.
It's true that I've said publicly that New York, and I'll use the general area. I typically talk about the city, but I'll talk about the general area. Has been a lousy beer town for quite a while, and I said that 10 years ago, and I meant it. I said it 5 years ago. I was wavering on it, and now I don't mean it so much. 5 years ago,
you were still right.
Yeah, but now we're at a point where you can walk into a place like Blind Tiger, and they're going to have local drafts on tap, and local being 50-mile radius of New York City, which we're well within right now.
Oh, we're just we're close to.
Yeah. No, I think I mapped it out just for...
Maybe we're 40.
Yeah.
40 outside of
48.9. Yeah, it's...
Yeah,
you can count the very top of the park. That's fine. But you can have great local pints poured for you now where you couldn't in the past. And I do believe that when I show up at a bar and I see that one of your beers are on tap, as removing myself as a journalist from the whole thing, but just being a beer drinker, I get excited because I know that you've put in your time as a brewer. I know that you've put in your time and really thought about these recipes, and it's not necessarily a fly-by-night thing. A lot of brewers, they get into it, they say, oh, I'm going to, make this beer, and then they do it and they put it out. Everything that I think you've put out has been, from what I can tell, a career's worth of building up to this point.
We like to use the word intentional, what we're doing, right? And we've made some missteps for sure, but we have, kind of facilities that most year-old breweries don't have, and experience certainly that almost no year-old breweries have.
Intentional, though. You've been brewing 20 years now?
Almost, yeah.
Yeah. It was a different world back then. It's certainly a different world now. Do you see the word intentional not used as much as you would like?
No. I mean, I've said this 1,000 times, maybe I've said it to you before, but we're coming up on, if we haven't already passed, 6,000 breweries or craft
coming
breweries,
up on it, yeah.
Which necessarily means there are that many different ways to do this. So what I've learned is not to assign right or wrong and to anybody's real approach. It's truth is in the glass, right? Yeah. There are lots of ways to skin this cat, and I have a particular way. Somebody told me early on in my career that every brewer clings onto one kind of one thing that they hold dear and are, unmovable about. And at that time, I was a home brewer even still, and the dialogue was about, some brewers love hops and some love malt and some love yeast and some love water, and that directly influences what happens sort of downstream from their process. I think what I've become is kind of a process junkie. Don't get me wrong, I love hops. Mm-hmm. I've been accused of hating malt. But I love the process, and I love the gadgets. And here, as you just saw when you walked through, we have a lot of control over our process. And I think that's leads me into using that word intentional. Like, between Mike and I, we've been brewing for 30 years, and we have a pretty good idea what's going to happen after we do something.
So, worked out on the West Coast originally, then came out east, worked at Ithaca Beer, then worked at Peekskill, and then you were able to design and build your own brewery here. And so as a process junkie, what did you put into the brewery here at Industrial Arts that you hadn't worked with in the past, or something that you got excited about? I mean, it's a different brewery setup than I think most people might actually see.
Well,
and in radio being a visual medium, if you could please.
I mean, that said, I guess we're also here to encourage people to come and see what we're up to.
Absolutely, and I want to get into that.
And
as well.
a lot of what we're going to talk about in these next few sentences is about our brew house, right? And it's on display for you to see when you come and visit us in our tasting room. We kind of focused on that being the centerpiece. Obviously, we spent a lot of time and money putting that thing together. It's very compact. It fits into the space like really about as tight as it can for its size. There's some debate with the Germans about how many vessels are in it. We have a mash kettle, a separate lauter tun, a boil kettle, a dedicated hop back, and a dedicated whirlpool. So we're able to stack 3 or 4 brews right behind each other, and it's really highly automated, right? So as long as we've been fastidious about the programming and what we call critical control points, we're hitting those same values and those same numbers every time we brew a beer. And like the reality is, every place that I've ever been, every small brewery that I've ever worked in before, is a lot of throwing valves, closing one, opening another, and like sometimes it's at 4 a.m, and sometimes it's at 11 o'clock at night, and sometimes you make mistakes, and sometimes your assistant brewer, kind of calls an audible and says that I don't think this beer is dry hopped enough, or there's points where you can lose control, and because time and temperature are the most important kind of things to me in the process, we took a lot of that we de-risked a lot of that by investing in that automation.
Sure.
So Mike and I talk through, how we want those profiles to look and what we expect that to translate to in the finished product. And then we spend a lot of time just staying out in front of that and making sure that we're ready to do all of those things. And we're when we brew here, because of the degree of automation, we're operators. We're just confirming that something went right.
Right.
Where in a lot of smaller breweries, you're making it go right, if that makes sense.
No, it does.
And when you fail at that, you've gone wrong. So hopefully it's clear, having just walked through here to you, that we're kind of built to scale a little bit, where we can, if one of these brands does well, or we're able to become sort of a regional player, or even drilling down hard on New York City, we can scale up 3 or 4 times over pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. Most small breweries don't see that as much of a, I don't know. In my experience, many breweries have underplanned for success, right?
Yes.
And not that success is a given, but everywhere I've been has gotten too small too fast. And if you could squeeze out another 100 barrels, you could sell it.
Right.
But gosh, where am I going to put that tank?
And that's really it. And so but going automated and going the way that you are, is that a luxury? Is that I don't know. Like,
at the time, I justified it because the euro was really soft.
Okay,
and I had a budget. I had a budget. Yeah. I had a working number, and all of a sudden, I was able to squeeze in more bells and whistles for that same number.
Yeah,
and we wound up just getting more or less a fully loaded out, like every a la carte option I could, some sort of novel ways to and pipe pathways for late hopping. That's a big focus here. But we were able to, the timing was really good. The euro was soft. It was shooting down over the installment plan.
Yep.
And I'm glad we went with it. We could have If it had been the opposite, we probably would have had more manual stations that we could have upgraded later on.
I guess what I was trying to get to with the luxury, though, has it freed you up to be creative in different ways? Has it freed you up to think about other parts of the business? Because automation isn't a bad thing in brewing.
Yeah. Well, it's been a new role for me to be out of that part of it more. And I think based on my own, I don't want to say neuroses, my own concerns, right?
Yeah.
Like there's some part of me knew I was going to have to check out of the process sometimes to do brewery owner stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like I have to be at events. I have to be, I also have 4 kids. I can't necessarily be here
all the time
at 6 a.m. and
Right.
midnight. I definitely can't be here at 6 a.m. or midnight.
Right. Well, you're not your 20-year-old
Right.
brewer self
Sure.
anymore. Yeah.
So I've had to wear different hats, maybe not more hats, but different hats here. And that was an early realization, was that I was going to have a steep learning curve on the business side of it, right? Which I was not as much in tune to when I was more in creative roles.
What was the most surprising lesson wearing that different hat in the last year that industrial arts has been around?
I mean, I just said this. I don't know if I explained it very well in the other interview that just ran in Forbes. I never took for granted that we were going to lose money. And in retrospect, and having talked to other brewery owners,
yeah,
they're like, yeah, you should have planned to lose money for like 2 years. And I just refused to ever allow that concession into my head. So like the first few months when we were like, I don't know, selling 100 barrels a week or so.
Yeah.
No, not even. We were selling like 100 barrels a month, maybe the first couple of months.
Right.
Right.
And you could make
and we
100
were draft
barrels a
only.
week. Yeah.
We could make and through the winter when we were kind of like, feeling out new accounts, like figuring out what our bandwidth really was. Like, we sell beer in Buffalo, but not in Long Island. It was tough to, like, it all worked on paper, but we were losing money, right, for a period of time that was much longer than I had counted on.
Okay.
Right? So that causes stress, right? Especially when you're not resigned to it.
Right.
But I think it also made me pay a lot of attention to the dated, like a lot of the minutia, like where is this $500 going, and like really like being careful about a lot of things. And there's some things that I'm more careful about than others, and probably to a fault.
But there is a sort of I see it even still, a casual nature to the beer industry and to craft brewing, especially where people need to pay attention to the bottom line, but it's also like, hey, it's a good time, or people,
like I've always had faith that it will click and work out,
right.
And I think that's been a really like a strength, right? Like
right.
I've never once really thought that, oh, this is doomed. There were a couple of like dark days where I was like, oh man, like how long is this going to set us back? Or like, there were some like permits we didn't know when we'd have. Well, now that they're all in hand, it's easy for me to say like I never had any doubt. But I think one of the biggest challenges is exactly that, is staying as positive as possible. And, I have a team that needs to be, reinforced, and they're like, they're killers. But it wasn't always totally easy. Mm-hmm. And we started out really like top heavy with some like, some really talented people who I really wanted to have on board. And it took really like a minute before we were built out to support all of the infrastructure that we put in.
Yeah.
And canning actually was a big part of that, getting the beer in more people's hands and spreading the word wider.
Did you ever consider bottles?
Not for a second.
Really?
Not even 3 years ago.
And
I wrote the business plan 3 years ago, I think before cans exploded to the point that they are now. Mm-hmm. But I knew for sure that the beers we were going to focus on are these hop forward, aromatic, and there's just no debate about what the better package is to get that to the consumer.
The two beers that you see in cans and draft around Tools of the Trade, Pale Ale, and Metric, the Pilsner. Is one a flagship? Are they neck and neck?
We certainly meant for Tools to be the flagship.
Yeah.
And we think it's a great way to show off that process and the clean approach and the sort of consistency that we can certainly do.
Yeah.
We actually price it a little bit lower to be really competitive.
Okay.
But the market is not as price sensitive as I had thought.
Okay.
And New York City, of course, is like, as you mentioned, is not just a great beer town, but it's also a drinking town.
Yeah.
And people aren't shy about wanting stronger beers because they're not typically driving.
Right.
So Tools has done really well for us, but I definitely pictured it, and certainly this is from a few years ago when I first started thinking about what a portfolio would look like. I think we were in more of a flagship period at that time.
Yeah.
And now it's clear that we need to be a little bit more agile and offer new stuff. We're not going to be the place that makes a new beer every week.
Right.
But we definitely have the luxury of not being locked into a legacy of, wholesaler.
Yeah.
Well, even like we haven't been around long enough that wholesalers have programs built around a brand.
Sure.
Or some of the things that, were once, amazing accomplishments are now kind of can be shackling, right? So some of those earlier brewers, so those legacy brewers are, so it's what we're reading about, now is, the people moving on in favor of fresher, more local and more, I don't know if whimsical is the right word, but...
Well, I think that people like to connect with their brand. I mean, you can say, Sierra was flat last year, Sam Adams was down, New Belgium was down. You can go into their tap rooms in Fort Collins and in Boston, and Chico and Mills River, and they're packed to the gills.
Man, I went to the New Belgium in Asheville.
Yeah.
And there were like 100 people outside throwing Frisbees and playing with their dogs. And I never thought of that as a different New Belgium than I've ever seen, because when I visited the mothership, it's on an industry tour at GABF. It's not during their normal business.
You're not there as a consumer.
Yeah, and I went to this particular, and I have a friend who works there who we were meeting at the bar, but it was eye-opening, like how I think they were more intentional about that there, right?
100%.
Like they built it out in a way that it was a very comfortable place to go and visit and be indoors, outdoors, and
well, sure. I mean, for any of those breweries that have launched their second location, they learned from their mistakes, and they learned from what they always wanted to do better. I mean, Sierra Nevada and Mills River is Malt Disney World because it's exactly what Ken's vision was.
Sure.
I mean, it's similar to you working for other brewers, and I think it's true for other brewers when you hang your own shingle, that you can do it the way that you have always envisioned it. Like you're not necessarily shackled by the boss, since you're just the brewer, because now you are.
Or am I?
Well,
that can be the double-edged sword, right?
But. It can absolutely, it can be. But I'm curious though, because when we were walking around on the tour before we started recording, you said you didn't mean to be a publican. You're not a publican, but every weekend when your tap room is open, it's crowded. People come here and drink, and you seem to say that sort of surprises you. We
have, again, like when I wrote the business plan just about 3 years ago, like I started it maybe 3 years ago this week even, the market was a different place, or it wasn't as easily identifiable as it is today, right? Maybe it had already started to turn, but it was still like at the beginning of that. I always planned on being primarily a production brewery, and assumed from the get-go that we'd be working with wholesalers, right? So I drew it up as more like, here's the margin that we're going to be able to keep. We're going to be strong throughout New York State. We're going to be a New York State focused brand, and we're going to get traction in Buffalo and Rochester and Syracuse and Albany. and especially in New York City.
Right. The major metropolitan areas, or the major population centers, I should say.
Yeah, and I saw retail as something that was, and again, this was before the Craft Act was even passed.
In New York State.
In New York State. So I want to say I was writing the business plan in the fall of 2014, and then January 2015, maybe February, the Craft Act went into effect. And actually, I was at Rushing Duck that day. Just randomly, I was driving around. I might have even been looking at a site somewhere.
That's another Hudson
in
Valley.
Hudson Valley, yeah. So I looked up and down the valley from a radius from our home.
Are they a cider? They're just
Rushing Duck is a brewery.
It's a brewery.
I think they make a cider by virtue, which is permitted by the Farm Brewing Act.
Sorry, I
maybe it's a
interrupted
ginger, like a.
That's what I know from them.
I think they started making cider. I don't think I've tried it.
Okay.
I'm reasonably sure they make a cider on the regular.
Okay.
But I happened to be there, and I was a little bit less in tune with it because I was not working in a brewery that it affected. It didn't affect Peekskill.
Right.
They have a pub brewing license. So pints were,
permitted. Yeah.
But I happened to be at Rushing Duck that first day that it was in place, and oh, you should have seen the look on Nikki's face when she sold her first couple of pints. Like, oh my God, we just made $15 that we had to give away last week.
Yeah.
And I stuck with that conservative, like maybe that it was 10% of our revenue while we were going to be small, and that it then skewed down to like 5, and then 3% of our overall like model.
Yeah.
Was way more to get to a point where the economies of the scale and the automation made sense, right? Like it wasn't going to pay for itself right away, but as you're able to just grow by standing up new tanks, it's like a lot more comfortable than doing a capital project every time you need to.
Sure.
Yeah.
You need to buy.
Really,
some
for us to grow, we just need
yeah.
to buy some stainless steel.
Okay.
And it's manageable, or at least it looks like it is on paper.
Yeah.
And I'm here to tell you that it is because we've already put the down payment on 5 new tanks, right? So,
and that'll get you to, you did about 5,000 barrels last year.
No, we set about we'll probably do about 4,000 this year.
Okay. And capacity for 5.
Yeah, we have capacity for 5, and hopefully we can really build upon that significantly next year. So sorry, long story short, we're outperforming my retail part of the model significantly by like 30% or something.
Okay.
And it's not a giant focus of ours, right? Like our tap room is really nice. It's very unique.
It is, yeah.
But it's in a geographically limiting location that you have to drive to.
Yes.
And
in a 200-year-old building, or parts of this complex are 200 years old.
So we try and like, when I'm at my worst, it's harder than at other times. So we try not to compare ourselves to anybody else, right? Because we had this runway based on our own, experience and stuff that not everybody has.
Right.
But other people have, got this lightning in a bottle thing where people are camping out on Friday night. So like you can't make that happen, right? You can't fabricate that.
Right.
So we try to do our own thing and stay true to our model as best we can. And obviously, I think I have already conceded that we've veered off of the flagship model.
Sure.
And we're listening to the consumer, and we're like trying to stay a little bit ahead. Like we definitely see pills emerging. Like
well, that's what I was
definitely
gonna
a
ask.
thing.
I mean, it's one of the beers that I associate with you guys, and it's not something.
Surprise hit of the summer. Like we made a batch because Mike and I wanted to drink pills.
And that's every brewer says
yeah.
that.
And like it really resonated right away. I think, Dan Suarez opened, kind of focusing on these.
The Suarez family.
Maybe got people more thinking about it in New York City, more maybe there was more pills FOMO.
Well, I don't know. I mean, people were drinking pills in the form of Stella Artois and Bud Light, but
that's a different drinker, though, right?
Sure, it is.
Like it's a different price point.
But this
It's
is
a
my
different-
argument about New York, though. It is a different price point, but my argument about New York is that it's a familiar word for people.
Yeah,
and that's why I'm
sure.
surprised that more brewers have been slow. I know
it's hard to
space
brew.
and can say
It's hard to brew.
hard to brew and hard to brew well. But if you do have the technical know-how to do it, you should, because it's words that people already know.
Just for instance, like without giving too much away,
Yeah.
it takes 4 times longer to make that beer than this beer.
To make the pills than it does your New England IPA.
Correct.
Sure.
4 times longer.
But you also have to drink your New England IPA within 6 hours of it being canned. Is that that's
Some of them
That's
are
a-
like
I
that.
know, I know.
I'm feeling like ours is a little bit
I was
more
teasing.
stable
Yeah.
and then some. I'm just like, I've come to terms with the fact that we need to offer a broader
Yeah.
portfolio than just.
Well, you have a
extra
silver can
pale
with a
ale
paper
and an
label,
IPA.
so you need to have a New England IPA.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
isn't that the way that it goes?
So I don't know if you've seen. We're lampooning it a little bit
All right.
by calling these people juice wolves.
Okay.
So I have a hashtag that I like people to use now. It's hashtag juice wolf.
I'll ask people to use that as they're listening to this. You can tag. So first of all, hashtags are great, but people need to find you on Twitter first. Which
Oh.
every time that I have a few drinks in me, which is often.
Oh gosh, I don't tweet.
can't.
We don't tweet.
No, but you guys
No.
have one.
We have one, but it's abandoned. We're active really on Instagram, and then we
Okay.
share that to Facebook.
Okay.
But and we've talked about this internally. Is Twitter's your default?
No, I mean I use Facebook. I use all of them.
We tend to use Instagram more than anything else.
Okay. Well, beer is a
and
visual medium.
Yeah, and we have not been very active on Twitter, but a big part of this is just based on our own staffing shortcomings.
Okay.
Like we've run super lean, and by the time some weeks we're like, oh, we're supposed to post on social media this week.
Okay.
But
See, I default. I'm such a Luddite that
Yeah,
like, I was a late adopter to Twitter. I'm on there, but it's when people say hashtag, I just immediately think of Twitter. But
Oh,
yeah,
sure.
but Instagram.
And I think of Instagram.
So
Sure. I
that's
think of
all.
Instagram.
That's all it was with me. But
and like
on Twitter,
and I'm
though,
older than you.
I know but you're hip. You have like kids
You're
who
too
are
kind. You're too kind.
But yeah, it's like industrial arts with the I being a number one and the
I got
the
roasted.
S
I got
is a
roasted for
5.
that.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. When I've had a few drinks, I can't find you guys on Twitter.
Yeah, so we did that. We launched that way on the Instagram too, and then we brought on our general manager, who's a millennial.
Yeah.
And she disabused me of the notion that was okay or clever.
Okay.
And we changed our Instagram handle to be Industrial Arts Brewing because that wasn't taken.
Right.
Maybe
hope
Industrial
not.
Arts was taken though.
Right.
And I didn't think it through. Like
that's-
I approached it like it was my own personal Instagram at first before we had any information to convey. Like, oh, I got really nothing to do because I don't have a lease yet.
Yeah.
So I better set up social media
It's
today.
just pics of the kids.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't think it got that personal, but that's maybe even a part of the learning curve that I talked about before.
Right.
Like that when I was at Ithaca, we had a marketing person who did that stuff, and it's never been my forte.
Well, but
And those are the kinds of things that are really important in today's market is keeping people informed in real time about what you're up to, because I think part of what's hurting these legacy brands is the perception that they are from the past, right?
and a little bit out of touch.
Right, yeah.
And that's a great save from this weird path that we just walked down about hashtags. But but you're out a lot. I mean, you are the guy associated with the brewer.
Sure.
I mean, you are the Sam Calagione of your brewery, Ken Grossman, all the. I mean, and when those guys are out and selling the beer, I mean, that is still sort of that personal touch and walking in.
That's priceless,
Do you still
right?
find that like being out there is still the best way?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I think, a big part of our early success was based on having so many of those relationships already from having been, I had some access to the tastemakers in the city when I was at Ithaca.
Yeah.
But when I was really doubling down on building the Peak Skill brand, I was in the city maybe twice a week and really getting, and having an amazing time, right? In the deepest, broadest market in the country,
right.
And seeing these places open one after another and none of them close, right?
Yeah.
And now there are groups that only had one bar that are on their third or fourth or fifth or sixth, and it's like you see them just being really successful because they're true to whatever it is that is their own mission. And it's been like a really cool reciprocal thing to see that happen both to the retailers and to my peers for it to finally work. You know, like when we talk about doing this 20 years ago, there was no way it was going to be a career.
Right.
It was, I liked beer and I was willing to break my back all day to trade for $8 an hour and a couple of growlers, right?
Well, I want to get to that in just a second, but I do want to ask you though, because you brought up an interesting point of being true to, and I know some of the bars in the city that you're talking about, and you know it's hard for those folks to continue to stay true to their mission because there are so many outside forces and there are so many things. And as a brewer though, I've had this conversation with other folks, and I'm curious about your take. Is when you're being pulled by fickle consumers, and that's really what we are as consumers, are fickle, of untapped reviews or, you know, somebody talking shit on Instagram or whatever it is that they're doing. How hard is it to stay true, you know, to your mission?
It's easier than it's ever been.
Really?
Right? Yeah. When I was younger, I was way more reactionary about that stuff, and I'd let somebody get under my skin with a bad review. Now I've learned to approach it that it's much better for me to approach it in the aggregate, right? And what we see is a lot of really great reviews and some outlying criticism, which comes with the territory, right? Like beer is such a personal thing.
Yeah.
It's something I make, that people put into their bodies, which is really all they have here in this world.
Right.
And I get it if something doesn't strike you, like if you don't like everything that we do, like it would be kind of weird if you did, actually.
I get that. And certainly when I travel to breweries and I'm trying different things, there's styles that I will try, but I'll probably stay away from when it comes time for the full pint, just because it doesn't, you know, suit my taste. I also don't take to Instagram or Twitter or Facebook and be like, you know, XX style of beer at this brewery is so terrible.
Right. And I see a
lot of that. And that's got to be...
I'm either really good at tuning that out or my friends are better than yours.
Okay. that's an excellent, that's more likely.
You know, I used to pay way too, frankly, too much attention to that stuff. I think it would probably help me a lot in building a reputation as being more sensitive about that, maybe. But now I think I've got to a point where I have more self-confidence and esteem than ever, I hope. And we try really hard not to let that stuff affect us. So like it can be good affirmation that you're doing a good job, but we try not to let it steer what we're doing.
So you used the word runway before to get to this point that we're at right now with your brewery. And you've talked about how you've grown from how it might have affected you in younger days and now, you know, not so much and everything like that. Career spans both coasts, working for Ithaca. I was telling you this before that Cascazilla Hoppy Red Ale was the first beer, and you're saying it's 2004. So I was 24 at the time. That was the first time that I truly appreciated an aggressively hoppy beer.
Where'd you live then?
I was in Jersey.
And we would have been selling, have been selling some of it in Jersey. Yeah.
I had it on, I don't remember where I had it on tap for the first time, but I had it, and we were talking about the labels, and we're so susceptible with tap handles and being sold. And it was this really cheesy, terribly bad, like Photoshop label of a waterfall and Godzilla shooting hops out of his mouth, red hops out of his mouth instead of fire. Yeah. And I had hoppy beers before, and I drank Sierra Pale. I had some others at a local brew pub, but I tried it, and it was just it snapped for me, in that way.
Well, that beer was that archetypal Northwest red IPA. It's got some chocolate and a lot of citrus, a little bit of color, but it's very dry. Mm-hmm. Those are beers that now are fairly dated, right?
Yeah.
Like when I've been back to Portland or Seattle, sometimes you'll order like the house IPA, and it's not what I expect an IPA to be now. Right.
And it's a throwback to...
It's a throwback, and some of them are still quite good, but
yeah.
But it's sort of there's a gap there.
That was just a diversion, though, because what I want to say is, you did great things at Ithaca, and then you went to Peekskill, and you got them up and running, and you did great things there.
Yeah, we built a really cool brewery there.
Yeah, you had a cool ship, and just...
and they still have, they still do.
It didn't leave with you, but, you can steal office supplies when you leave a job. It's a little bit harder to steal a cool ship underneath your jacket, but that's the runway that sort of got you to take off to where you are today. How did you know when it was time to leave working for somebody else and to start your own thing?
Well, it's it's a personal decision, right? Because it's like a long-term commitment to invest in a place like I have here. Right. And it's, it's a project to raise the money to do this.
But and I'm not saying that you're an old guy, but you're not a young guy as well.
I'll tell you, I always knew I wanted to have a brewery. What that brewery was, changed almost constantly in my mind's eye over different moves and different industry sort of trends. And at one point, I thought I wanted to be a hermit brewer who lived on a hill and made only cork and cage, cult beers.
I could see you doing that.
At one point I thought why don't I just talk to somebody like Phil Markowski and just launch a brand and just be the face of a brand and not, go and brew it someplace that can make a big batch and take advantage of my industry connections that way without
and there's folks without
who do that, having to raise the kind of capital that we did to do this. There was a point at which I was more interested in being a publican than I kind of communicated to you earlier. Mm-hmm. And then the reality of it is, my wife and I have 4 kids, and we need a viable way to raise them, right? And small brewery might not be that. It might just be a real modest kind of income and something that you're always figuring out how to pay for ingredients that you bought 30 days ago. That's still not finished product, and that tension between being hand to mouth and something that's scalable. So it went through a lot of different iterations in my head, and even then I never pictured it being on a site like this. So it was always in a warehouse or an industrial park somewhere. Then you'd find a cool site that ticked a lot of boxes, but there was one fatal flaw. I looked at probably 15 different places up and down the Hudson Valley, and almost any one of them would have informed the brand in a different way than this one did, right? The name of this brewery came out of this site for sure.
It's not like you had... I'm sure you've had names that you've wanted to use in the past. And
yeah, my corporate name is Spectacle Brewing, LLC. Okay. And that was before
your glasses wearing.
Yeah,
individual.
And that was before I really had a site or a fully formed brand, and it takes and
that would have been weird had you moved into
slowly.
this.
I'm partially it's probably fear of commitment, right? But we let it unfold very slowly. Like I said earlier, we didn't start canning for 6 months. Wanted the beers to be really dialed in before we sent them out into places, parts unknown. This question was about why
how do you
finally,
know?
Why,
yeah.
How did I know? Oh, so what I was really going to say is I turned 40 the year that I wrote the business plan. And it's not like I felt like I hadn't accomplished anything, but that's a milestone for some people. And for me it was, I guess. And I had, get solicited for things, you get recruited for jobs. Like some stuff I just kind of was like, no, I'm good. I'm doing this thing that I like. My situation in Peekskill was great. Like my commute, like I took the train from where we live, 15-minute train ride up and down the Hudson.
That's really nice. When Amtrak works or when Metro North works.
But it was really reliable for what I needed it for. We live in a quaint little town there on the Hudson, and like we love it there. But there's only so much you can do working for somebody else, right?
Right.
So, and not everybody feels this way, right? And I still bristle when people call me an entrepreneur because I still feel like I'm a brewer who is figuring out how to make it into a business. Like I'm not doing it for business's sake. I'm doing it for brewing's sake, right?
Well, an entrepreneur kind of has a different connotation.
Yeah,
to it.
it's a little bit
you're
like
in it for money. You're in it for,
or you're selling widgets or whatever your widget is now.
Right,
Is what
and there's nothing
what
wrong
you're
with
asking.
making money. And if you have a good product, people will buy it. But it's a different. I think that's a different switch in people's brains.
Yeah, and it can be certainly something to be very proud of.
And proud we are of all.
But I
that.
made a casual commitment to myself to take every meeting when I turned 40, to stop turning down meetings.
Okay.
Just to like listen to people. And it started me on this path, and it took me down a path an opportunity that didn't pan out. And I was so far invested in starting something new at that point, and I had to put together or at least contribute in a significant way to a brewery business plan. And I could see how it worked on paper and like, oh, well, maybe this isn't so crazy. And then I happened into a meeting with some people who really seemed like they were looking for a brewery project to invest in, and it grew from there.
As we start to wind up here, we were walking through your tasting room before, and I mean, we haven't even gotten into. You have a cool beer pipeline that goes from your brew house into the. I'm sorry.
At that point, it's just
Yes, your wort going in because the federal government doesn't care what happens in the brew house; they only care what happens in the.
Right, and
fermenters,
beer is way more prone to those temperature swings. So like before it's fermented and we're pumping it down there, it's.
And it's 100 meters too, which I didn't have a scale of what that was until we just walked it on our way here before. But it's a cool thing.
I did the most math on.
And if people come, they take a tour, I guess, and they can see this for themselves. Is that?
We're getting there to the point that we're doing full on tours, but like I tried to imply earlier, like so much of our process is right there on display.
Yeah.
So much of I think the primary stuff that we are focused on is right there and like really almost within reach. Right?
Okay. See, I should have prepped better for this.
No, we will.
This is podcast number 2, so
we will offer
forward.
Tours in the future, and it's noteworthy because the site is like the way it's laid out is you walk kind of down a long hill.
Oh yeah,
and when you've
and it's like an active roadway as well.
Yeah, and when you've walked through to the end of our warehouse, you're virtually 2 city blocks away from where you started. So we're still trying to figure out how to staff that, right? Like we're a skeleton crew, and if somebody were to take a group of 10 on a walk, the person they left behind.
Listen, if you bring back 9, that's still a win. But what I wanted to say though is, so people can come and they can see the process, they can drink the beers. You're obviously committed to quality. You're committed to education. But for somebody who doesn't know good beer or hasn't had a full experience of it, they haven't had their Cascazilla moments yet. What do you see as a brewer as your most important responsibility to a consumer?
Oh, good question.
Oh, thanks. That's why I'm here.
I think
that's how I got the job.
Well, so I'll just.
It's not like the other podcast, This is
How'd you? Who were you in a past life to have to get stuck with that one?
He's not going to listen to this. That's fine. All right, we've stalled enough. That's
it had to come out somewhere.
That was pretty good. Yeah. I just meant all of that hemming and hawing was to give you time to formulate an answer.
I want to be careful that you don't dwell on the thing and that I maybe misspoke about, like
Okay.
the publican thing.
Yeah.
Right. So one of the things that has been the most valuable and the most like illuminating for me is seeing that thing again that you mentioned, that light bulb go off when, like what we hear a lot here is, I don't even like beer, but that's really good. And I think that's a function of people tasting beer at the source for the first time, and especially neighborhood or really local people. There's something to be said that the water that we use is familiar to them. It's the water from their homes, right? So it's got maybe like our busiest days are, around the holidays when people are back and suddenly now there's something to do in the neighborhood here. Right. So we get more of a cohort like the typical craft beer tap room demographic during those times, like the typical, like the age, like the 22 to whatever the coveted age demographic is, right?
Who are complaining that your New England IPA isn't hazy enough?
It's not wine enough, or it doesn't have enough weed in it. I don't know, but that's definitely fucking hazy enough.
Yeah, no, I've been drinking Grinch for the last 20 minutes of this interview here, NEPA, as it were.
But I think that stewardship of and it's almost like an obligation at this point is for people to, or for me to convey to people that no matter where you go now, you should be able to find this, right? Like, and if you go into a brewery and their beer isn't good at their brewery, that says a lot, right? Like it should be at its best there, right?
100%.
And I think also like a lot of the people here around North Rockland County, they didn't have any kind of reference point for this, so they didn't know what to expect. And we're definitely putting flavors in front of them that they've never considered in a setting that probably seems impossible based on their experience with this site, right? Like this has been like, I showed you where the place was flooded, and it's been just sort of marginalized, kind of like a I don't know, like an albatross. Like it's kind of like it's got to be. It must have been really hard for our landlord to make it through lean times after floods, and like it's on the upswing now. And I'm like really proud that we've played a part in that. But I think it's like we have that one opportunity to be forthright when we're right in front of somebody and tell them like, yeah, this tastes great because it hasn't been on a delivery truck or left on a loading dock in the sun or like handled by, 4 truck drivers and abused in a hot basement in Brooklyn or whatever. And that those are really, those I think are those factors. And when we're reading these like industry trends where everything is becoming a local tap room, right? It's because the beer tastes better in the local tap room. Like it's almost impossible that it doesn't.
Right.
And people are woke to that, right? Like they expect that, and they know that probably my beer is going to taste better here than it does at one of my accounts.
Sure.
Not always, but if they want to get that freshest can, they can come here and get it. And some of those barriers have been removed, right? Some of those accesses to the product.
And if you don't do that, I mean, I'm always surprised when brewers at their own tap room are, I don't want to say phoning it in, but quite honestly, I've been to places where they're phoning it in. And
well, they're missing an opportunity.
Yeah.
And I've gotten a lot out of this industry, and I feel an obligation to not just promote our own brand. And I have pet friends whose beers I really like, and I'll almost always talk them up, but I try to do it in the general vein. Like, you can go to Peoria now, and I bet there's good fresh beer in Peoria.
Probably.
And this should be your expectation when you walk into a place like this. And if your mind isn't blown, go down the block because somebody else is doing it better.
Yeah.
And I think that's the important thing, is for people to know why, or understand why it tastes so good at some places. right? That they are focused on that experience, and they're focused on their glassware, and they're focused on the whatever it takes to make their environment stand out from somewhere else.
Right.
Because there are 6,000 of us, right?
You have to find a way. You have to find a way. But if the liquid's good and the beer is good and the commitment's there, I think you have a window.
Yeah. You have a window, right? And that's been one of the other realizations that I meant to touch on a little bit is when you see these big seminal brands in decline, that means the writing's on the wall at some point for you too, right? Like we're not going to be a new brewery for much longer if we still are after being open a year. And staying relevant is probably one of the biggest challenges that any given brewery faces at this point.
Right, but do you have designs to go bigger than this area?
We want to be really strong here.
Okay.
Right? We want to be narrow but deep.
Yeah. I mean, somebody was just telling me, I was having a separate conversation earlier today where they're down in North Carolina and Brooklyn makes great beer, but people want to drink local, so they're not going to drink Brooklyn down there. You know, it's, we'll drink it up here and it'll do well in some other places like that. But those bigger brands are having a harder time outside of their home market these days.
Well, Brooklyn is maybe...
It's not
a great example, right? Because
but
Brooklyn is more of a global brand at this point.
Of course, but this was just...
But yeah, like there are...
Yeah.
I mean, and again, like be careful not to like call anybody out as like being in decline or whatever.
And
but
again,
like
the liquid, the beer is great, and there's good beer coming out of there and inventive stuff coming out of there. But
the lesson for me, is that even the best beer, somebody is gonna do it differently sooner or later and appeal to somebody in a way that you're not. And to expect, like, I think one of the things that the industry was probably guilty of was a little bit of hubris about continuous 10, 20% growth. Like
100%.
Well, like, again, I want to be careful about, I don't know what other people's board meetings are like, right?
Right.
Like,
but I'll agree with you flatly and say
like,
that. Yeah.
for people to be leveraged out of their, into debt at this point with mature businesses, like, it makes no sense to me. So what we're trying to do is not put ourselves in that situation where we have debt to service, where we have, questionable growth plans, like where it's makes sense and we have compelling reason to believe that it makes sense. And I think we have, runway is the right word. We have runway to grow for X amount of time, and then there's going to be somebody new who's more relevant and siphon some of that away. And it might not be one place. It might be a whole school of brewing that we don't even know about yet, right?
Right.
There's some...
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Do you know?
I don't.
Can you tell me?
No. If I did, I'd be consulting somewhere else.
But that's kind of, I think, an advantage that we have is that experience and a longer view of, like, I've seen the shakeout. Right, I saw it happen.
Right,
I've worked for a brewery that closed.
What was the brewery?
It was called Jupiter.
Okay,
and they actually still have.
Sorry, you hesitated.
No.
It's like a painful memory. It's, I'm sure it is
formative.
Yeah,
right. Like, it sucked at the time.
Yeah.
I worked at a brewery that it's the same owners as 20 Tank. I worked at a 20 Tank.
Yep, 20 Tank.
I wasn't there. I didn't work there when it closed. I worked there before it closed. But it was the same owners as Jupiter, and they have a tap room in downtown Berkeley. They own Triple Rock Brewing in downtown Berkeley.
Yep.
At the time, they did not own Drake's, but they do also own Drake's now. They own Big Time Brewing in Seattle. It's family business.
There's a few in that portfolio now.
Yep. And there was a small brew pub set up in the deep East Bay in Walnut Creek on the other side of the Caldecott Tunnel, east side in the desert part of the East Bay. And we brewed the beer there and trucked it to the main outlet in Berkeley. And this town, Walnut Creek, like, if you haven't been there, it's like an outdoor shopping mall. And it wasn't a viable place for a brew pub in 2000. So what happened was they closed. So he closed the place where the beer was brewed and went into a cooperative arrangement where the tanks that were there got installed at Drake's for Drake's to contract brew.
Okay.
Co-pack, whatever the word you want to use is, their house brands there. And I was the brewer at the place that closed. The focus was on the equipment, and the people were an afterthought. And it's one of those things.
I shouldn't laugh, but like,
no.
It's such a business owner. Yeah.
And I've had other negative experiences with other brewery owners, and many positive ones as well. But this was a formative one where I think I even have said to my brother at one point, like, when I become a beer baron, remind me that it's because of the people that are doing the dirty work, right? And that person feeling like an afterthought, like, has a real effect.
And you're saying you have 5 employees now and 5 part-time, 5 full-time,
yeah, I think
5
there are
part-time.
11 of us total. Yeah.
I mean, so that experience, these things. I mean, it's things that you don't think about in the moment that come back to you later.
I'm trying really hard to walk the walk on.
Yeah,
it's like taking care of people, being like a people first company, not a profit first company, and like we haven't lost anybody yet, and I think that's really remarkable.
That is.
So, it's crazy here, and I'm not a traditional business person or certainly a traditional boss, but I hope everybody feels like as valued as they are, right? Because you can't, equipment is a tank is a piece of steel.
Yeah,
a person is a much more complex and much more important, to the success or failure of any given thing. We try to focus I've tried to make that a priority, like being progressive with benefits packages and stuff like that.
And that's something that I don't know if a lot of upstarts are thinking about, or loyalty is important.
I had to do it, though.
Yeah.
For the record, I had to do it to recruit the people I wanted,
of course,
because that's what they're worth.
Right.
So we've always budgeted for that.
But thinking about that, even,
but it made us very top heavy. Top heavy.
We've been drinking your beers, Metric and Wrench, and I've been loving the hell out of them. And people should certainly drink these beers. What is one beer that you don't make that you think somebody new to drinking flavorful beer, or somebody who has been drinking for quite a while that may not be thinking about it? Like what's the beer that's not yours that you would recommend somebody to drink?
Oh my God! You know what? One of the best beer experiences I had this whole year.
What?
A couple of bottles of Prima Pils at the airport.
Oh yeah.
Like, that beer is
Victory.
So good.
It is.
It's so good.
Yeah.
That one came right to mind.
Okay.
And that's another thing. Like, I know, like, I only,
folks, and like,
no. It's more like I can't think of any beer as just like a beverage, right? I have to deconstruct it.
Okay.
If I put it in my mouth, I'm like, how did they do this? Either for better or worse. Like, sometimes it's, why did they do this?
But is there something that you go to
more
just
often
for your
why
own
did
pleasure?
they do this than for my own pleasure?
Because maybe that's the way to get to the answer.
Okay, so this brewery was built on All Day IPA, on Founders All Day IPA.
Really?
Yep. When we didn't have beer, Mike and I would be buying
the 15
packs every second or third day, right? And there's a good store like just a mile or two from here. And they've done an amazing job of their distribution. Like, you can get that beer fresh and at an affordable, and honestly, I've been making a brewer's wage for so long. Like, beer's kind of expensive when you have to buy it, right? And we didn't have a brewery. We didn't have beer to trade with anybody else or take home. And we recently had a staff outing. We all went sailing for a day.
Right.
I bought a 15 pack. It was the first time I had one in 6 or 8 months, maybe.
Right.
And it's so good. It's so good. And their Pils is really good too, that American style Pils. But I look more like I'm probably getting away from thinking of like precious beers as being something that is like...
I don't even mean precious. I mean, there's certain things like, I mean, for me, like Pilsner or Kel. Like everybody should drink Pilsner or Kel.
I had a bad one last week.
No shit.
Yeah, but it was at a questionable place.
Oh,
like,
okay.
It was like it was my best.
Oh, that's so disappointing.
It was my best bet.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah.
What bus station?
But yeah,
did you
but
find
certainly
yourself
like
at? Yeah.
certainly like I'm more paying attention to places that are able to do it in volume now than, knock it out of the park on a small batch. And there's nothing wrong with small batch brewing.
Right.
But being able to sustain it and work on that consistency. And,
I think it's a great goal.
And like that's what's going to keep us in the game, is being a little bit bigger than small, but not much bigger than regional, right? We don't have aspirations to make 1 million barrels of beer. But if we scale up and inhabit the space that we have here and keep growing into it, like it looks like it'll be a pretty rewarding trip. So like, I guess I'm more paying attention to the places that have been able to keep great beer in the market.
And then become that yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And become like some, a brand that people can count on, even maybe trying a new line extension. Like, I haven't had this one, but I bet it'll be good.
Right.
And it's kind of earning that trust. And it's harder to do when you're just like making a zillion different things in a zillion directions, in my opinion. But a lot of people thrive on that too. But I've scratched a lot of those super like creative itches through the years.
We could keep going, but
sure.
I think we're at the I think we're at the end point.
All
I know
right,
you're like all excited, like yeah, let's just keep going. But
I gotta go back to work.
I know it's. I need another beer. Chief, thanks so much.
Well, that's what I do at work.
This is me too, actually. Jeff O'Neill is the owner and head brewer at Industrial Arts in Rockland County, the Hudson Valley
or
of
in
New
West
York.
Haverstraw in the hamlet of Garnerville.
They can find you on
You can
Instagram.
find us on Instagram at industrialartsbrewing.com.
And
you can
hashtag,
find our website.
Wait, what's the hashtag again?
Juice Wolf.
Juice Wolf.
Juice Wolf, yeah.
Please remind people of that.
Yeah, we just made a short run of T-shirts with 3 wolves howling at a boss pour.
If you would like to hear, what else do you want to plug?
I was just saying thank you for coming out.
Oh, thanks for
thinking of us
coming on.
This, and hopefully we got somewhere. And
no, this is
hopefully some of your listeners will.
This was great. You can read more about Jeff in the upcoming issue of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. You can find us online at beerandbrewing.com. If you have suggestions for future guests, if you want to critique this performance, it still gets under my skin, but you're welcome to do so. I'm John Holl at beerandbrewing.com or on Twitter at John_Holl, and it's HOLL for those of you who don't know. We really appreciate you subscribing and tuning in and listening, and we will get back at you soon enough.
I'd love to see any of your listeners that get turned on by this at our bar.
Come on up and visit. I might be here.
If not almost always here. Perfect. I'm not out doing something else supporting the brand.
Love it. Thanks so much. Cheers, guys.
Thank you, John.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.